something. So, although here it can be pretty far away too. You take a subway, you take a bus, you take. I miss the spirit, the excitement, the action in New York City. I miss being interviewed by you.
I know probably a lot of people want to know about the Lee Zodiac book here. What can you tell us about what's most exciting about it for you?
Well, this new Zodiac book is different than anything I've ever done because the hero doesn't have one superpower that he or she got from someone and exploits it. But this involves the 12 legendary characters of the Chinese Zodiac. And all of those powers rotate back and forth with our hero. And it becomes a different type of story than any I've ever worked on. I don't work on it myself. I have a collaborator, Stuart Moore, who's a great writer. And there are more illustrations in this novel than any novel that's ever been published. It's not what we call a graphic novel. It's not a comic book. It's a real novel. But there are more than 50 pages of magnificent illustrations by Andy Tong, who's a wonderful writer, artist rather. I'm the wonderful writer. I almost lost myself there. And it's different, as I say, than any superhero book I've done. It delves into Chinese mythology with the Chinese Zodiac characters. You know, if I'm looking at them and you ask the question, excuse me, it's all the Zodiac characters. Anyway, that's as much as I can tell you because this is a very hush-hush secret book. It's so secret that I've been traveling around the country promoting it. And it's done, of course, one of the most exciting things to me is it's being published by the Disney Company. And you can't do better than that. And my own company, Power Entertainment, to think that we're part of the Disney Company, it's very exciting. And to be here talking to all of you is even more exciting. And so far, nobody has walked out, which is a record for me. Okay, it's up to you now.
All right. So you have a history with kids being thrust into extraordinary circumstances, going back to Peter Parker. What was the most extraordinary circumstance ever that teenage Stan Lee had to deal with?
Well, one of my most extraordinary circumstances is sitting right here. With all you literary people, I usually talk to just ordinary people. But I don't know, extraordinary circumstance. My life has had, every day is an extraordinary circumstance. And I think lately, I've been going to a lot of comic book conventions. And don't ask me why, but so many people, dozens over the past couple of years, have asked me to write my name on their arm or their shoulder, and they want to get it tattooed. And if there's anything more extraordinary than that, I don't know what it could be.
What was teenage Stan Lee like? Was he a reader?
Oh, I was adorable. My mother told me. I wasn't the leader. I always had one problem. I was always the youngest person at whatever I did, so I was never a leader. And the street where I grew up, I was the youngest kid amongst all the kids. So I was the one, they borrowed my football or my baseball, and if I was lucky, they'd let me play with them with it. Then I went to school. I was always the youngest kid in my class. I went to the Army. I was the youngest guy in my platoon. I finally got a job at Marvel, which was then called Magazine Management Company. I'm talking about the 1950s. And I was the youngest person working in the office. When I became an editor, I was the youngest editor. And now to show you how strange life is, I'll bet you I'm the oldest guy in this room. I don't know if you're reporting because I'm the oldest guy or because you won the bet.
What was your first week like at Marvel Comics?
Well, my first week at Marvel Comics, which then was called, God knows, it wasn't Marvel Comics, Goodman Publications, or Magazine Management, or something like that. And I was hired by two guys named Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. And I might add, they're two geniuses. Well, they were, and they were running the comic. They were the comic department because the publisher, Martin Goodman, he also had other magazines. He had sports magazines and adventure magazines, some rather sexy magazines, all different kinds. And the comics were almost like a throwaway then. So Joe and Jack, they handled them. They needed somebody to fill the inkwells. In those days, they used ink. And to run down into the drugstore and get them sandwiches at lunch hour. And to erase the pages. See, first they would draw the page in pencil. Then they would go over it in ink. And the person who went over it in ink was known as the inker. So once the page had been gone over in ink, there were always little remaining pencil lines left. And it was my job to erase those pencil lines. And boy, I better not miss one. So I did all that inspiring work for a few months. And then, for some reason or other, Joe and Jack were fired. And the publisher, Goodman, looked around. I was the only guy in the office. So he said, Stan, do you think that, he probably didn't even call me Stan, he probably said, hey kid, do you think that you can take care of things until I can hire a grown-up? Well, when you're 17 or so, what do you know? I said, sure, I can handle it. And I think he forgot that the comics were so unimportant to him, he forgot all about it. I stayed there ever since. And I started writing stuff, and then I started hiring other artists. And before you knew it, I was the editor. Before he knew it, I think. So that was my early days. What was the question? It's terrible. You start talking, you forget why you started, and I'm so in love with the sound of my own voice, which you'd never suspect.
I'll admit, you were responsible for so many superheroes that we all loved in the 60s, mainly in the 60s. In today's world, who is most relevant?
Most relevant? Yeah. Me! I would like to think that they're all relevant in their own way, because you gotta be relevant in order to sell a lot of copies and in order to make a lot of good movies. Anything, I think, that makes a good story is relevant, because people love good stories. And anything that can bring somebody a little bit of enjoyment, because there are so many things that can make people miserable in this world. There's so many tragic events. This is probably getting away from your question, but I used to be embarrassed because I was a writer, because I felt there are people building bridges and doing important things, and I'm writing these idiotic stories. And then, little by little, as the fan mail came in, and as I was invited to conventions and so forth, I realized entertainment is very important to people. And I began to realize that's why people who are singers, like Frank Sinatra was, people who are actors, dancers, writers, musicians, anybody who entertains the public is really doing a good service.